this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogmen, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing? Good, I hope. I'll comment on what I usually comment, which is the weather, because it's hot. And I'm a Florida girl, okay? And I come from South Florida, which is subtropical. It's hot. You know, of course, I've gone through this heat before, some version of it, but there's nothing like when you're there to make it feel like it's really hot. So yeah, we went through a spate there with a lot of thunderstorms, and then it's just really hot. As in, like I said, I'm a wither wimp. I go out there early in the morning and like around 7 p.m. to do anything. It took me like 3 days I have acreage, but I'm the lawnmower lady, by the way, in the household. And it took me like 3 days to cut the lawn out here just because I had to split it up. Like, I'm not doing this in the middle of the day. There is no way. And I'm pretty brave about that. But no, it was just no, unless I want to get a heat stroke, I got to cut this up. So yeah, something that normally will take me one full day if I get up early in the morning, the most 2, I had to split up into 3 days. And I'm keeping all my animals. As a matter of fact, I usually have a big porch where I leave my dogs out, usually when I'm away, like in the middle of the day. And even though I have fans there, it's a screen porch, and I've had to drag them inside because I'm like, I cannot leave you guys out here. It's just too hot. But again, and then it'll be winter, and we'll be like, man, it's so cold. It'll be like nothing to see here, folks. But anyway, let's get on to the good part. The good part is who we have as a guest today at Stories of the Supernatural. And this is the first time that this gentleman has been here. His name is David Collis. And he is an artist, an author, and who characterizes his life as a quest driven by the romance of exploration and invention. He is versed in the humanities, art, and religion, and holds a bachelor's and a master's degree in fine art. And I'm going to quote him here on his biography. My life was an unplanned walkabout that didn't unfold as expected. I wanted one thing, but received another. Questions shaped it instead. Revelations inspired it. Awakenings expanded it. Curiosity fueled it. I traveled the world, explored sacred places, and searched religious and mystical traditions. The intelligence of my hands built houses, furniture, cabinets, and coupled with my artistic personality, created abstract art. The motto required is, life is remarkable, be ready for surprises, and nimble for the unexpected. That's an understatement. Help me welcome him. How are you doing today, David?
I'm doing great. I just want to mention something about your Miami heat over there.
Yes.
I've been in Miami right before the 4th of July. It was 100 degrees with 100% humidity, and it was raining cats and dogs. I've never been so miserable in my life.
Yes. And I've gotten used to that. That's why I'm saying I'm used to difficult weather.
Yes.
Because where I moved like a couple of years ago, I'm up in North Florida now. But, anything south of like West Palm Beach, you go into subtropical climate, which is, like you said, the humidity, that sticky heat kind of deal. And I grew up in that. That was the norm. I'm just being a wimp because it's hot. And up here, there's still humidity, but it's not the subtropical thing going on. But I'm saying, when you're living in that present moment, it's like, this is the worst. And it's like, okay.
A friend of mine's telling me that the ocean temperature is getting really hot too.
Right. I was hearing that the Atlantic, that the surface temperatures have never been as hot. But the flip side of that is, and having grown up, I was born and raised in Miami, is that around this is we're right in the middle of hurricane season. And usually by now, even if we wouldn't have had any hurricanes come into like the coast, there's none have developed. Believe it or not, it's really weird, which is great, by the way. It's one of those. That's one of the things that when you lived in South Florida between
Uh,
May and November, late November, which was hurricane season, you always were looking at the weather like what's forming off the coast of Africa, and will end up, coming into the Caribbean and into where we're at.
yeah, you
No
have to.
storms,
You
no
have to.
hurricanes. Even though a lot of people will say, well, wait until September and October because lately some years we've had those like almost late summer storms, but still. So hot Atlantic, but no storms, no hurricanes. And for
Well, we've
people
had
who
a
don't live
very
in a
freaky
coastal,
experience. I was going to say we have a very freaky experience out there in Hawaii with that
oh
hurricane.
my God. Wait, that's what I was looking at. I was looking at and I was like, wait, how did this go from 0 to 60? How did
Yeah.
this blaze get so out of control so quick? I mean, people are jumping
And
into the
all of a
water.
sudden
Like
you've got like, it's just outrageous.
I was looking at because when I heard the news, it was like, okay, Hurricane Dora and then fires. And I was like, whoa, how do we go from hurricane and fires? How did that happen? I was
Right.
like, I don't understand this. And then I realized, okay, these apparently the winds from the hurricane that didn't do a direct strike helped to fan this fire to like spreading
I
and
wonder if
like
there
the
was
way
some
it
type of,
did rapidly. But I'm like, okay, but how did this thing start?
yeah,
Was it lightning strike? I don't know. Were they going
right,
through a dry period?
right.
And you know what? I've had trees come down, like huge trees, and I've had big bonfires, and I burn a lot of stuff here because I have no choice. I do understand very well that if you got a wind going on, that fire will take off in
Yeah,
minutes.
yeah,
It's going.
yeah.
That part I understand really well. But it was like, wait, how did we go from and I mean, I looked at the scene where the cars, everything's melted, and I don't know, the last time I saw there was about 36 people that had died. And it was like,
That's a huge number.
that is. And it's like, from what I understand, the residents there were caught by surprise, in other words, is what I'm
Yeah,
saying. That they didn't expect that was going to happen. Like they basically had to flee, that with clothes on our back kind of thing.
yeah, and then actually go into the ocean to save themselves.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
wow. See, I've
I don't
been
know.
at
Let's
that
see what
harbor at
comes of that.
Lahaina. I've been at that harbor. I've seen
Yeah.
the photo, and it's just like it's totally devastating. I've been at that harbor on numerous occasions. So this
And
is
I've
just
never,
totally
you
stunning.
hear about the fires like up in like in California and Colorado and things like that, but I've never heard of a fire like that in Hawaii of all places. I've never heard of
Of
that.
course. I was stunned. What do you mean fire?
Yeah.
They were
Yeah.
talking about fires. What do you mean fire? It's
Exactly.
tropical. I
That's what
mean,
I thought. I said, a fire? A fire?
they're on the equator. It's wet.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, no. And then they're throwing the hurricane thing in there. I was like, I missed the connection, but yeah, they're saying, let's see what comes of it. I mean, I imagine now they can't do much of an investigation until they actually, I think they put that fire out because
So it's still going.
the last I looked,
Yeah.
basically it looked like and I don't blame them, like their fire department they were maxed out, like trying to get this thing under control.
And
Um,
how do you call for help? Oh, can you people from the West Coast just bring over your
that's another
fire
thing. When you're
engines?
not on the mainland, you've got whatever is there, especially when we're talking an emergency. It's like
Yeah.
whatever is there, you better get it over there quick.
Yeah,
I don't know.
get those Navy ships out there and start pumping some water out
That's what
onto
I
this.
thought. I said, I'm not that. I don't know how close the Navy base is to where this is at, but it was like, okay, I hope that the Navy is sending some help or something. But
It's just
let's see what comes of this when the dust settles. So
yeah.
what they say, how this got started, and what happened, and how did this get so out of control? And I bet you they're going to have to make up new rules from now on. Is like, I don't know. You know, like in Florida, you know, we have hurricane evacuation routes, some way to get people out of there besides jumping into the ocean.
Right.
You know, let me ask you,
Well,
David, in your bio, which I thought was great, you mentioned that your life, I mean, and I know that your life didn't unfold as expected, which for most people will say that but in your case, what did you mean by that?
well, I felt like I wanted to do one thing and then another thing happened. So I wanted to become a pilot, and that
Okay.
didn't happen. So a lot of other things started to unfold kind of in the negative. And from that, there were questions, and the questions that I started to ask were what started to drive kind of my life. And that I think is a really kind of a key and interesting issue. And that is for me, and I think that this is also kind of a truism, is that once you start asking questions and you really are devoted to understanding the answer to the question, your life starts to take on a new direction. So I ended up wanting to know more about religion, myself, psychology, art history, all of these kind of ideas. And I never was kind of interested in those things. Well, art I've been interested in, but when it came to like art history and psychology and religion, those weren't like part of my lexicon. And then
Right.
I had an event that was really kind of, it just shook me to the core. And that just put me on this course to start really investigating these questions. And lo and behold, that has been what I keep doing. So the
That's
question is, how do you
so
build a
interesting.
house? How do you build furniture? How do you build, how do you deal with wood? What's all that? What are tools? How do you work with tools? All of those things just started to come to me because I kept asking questions. And this other one was, like who is God and what are our religious traditions? So they're always in the background, but until you actually start to do an investigation into them, they seem to always just sit on the shelf somewhere else,
Sure.
and they're like part of the furniture, right?
Right, right.
It's
Well,
always
you
been
know
in the
what?
family, it's just part of the furniture, it's part of your life, but I felt like I needed
Nowadays,
more than
there
that.
is so much out there, and I hate to say it, but sometimes you have to be careful when you're looking at something to look at it objectively, but at the same time, you know, sometimes people that when they write about things, they don't source them well, or the information that's given is not accurate. So, especially when you're getting into something like religion or spirituality, um, how can I say? What's the word I'm thinking of? That you try to be as objective as possible
Yeah,
without coloring it one way or the other, depending. I don't know what your background is or your belief system, um, or preconceived ideas. How's that
yeah.
when it comes to
Well,
spirituality and
the other
religion?
thing that's happened to me is because I went down this road and I started to really think through it, I've then started to arrive at some different conclusion and different understandings, and with new questions. So a question, you know, propels you down. You do a lot of investigation, a lot of research, and then all of a sudden that opens up into a whole new field. And now you're in a
Sure.
different territory with a whole new set of questions with the same kind of drive. So
Right, that you
that's
wouldn't have
the way
ended
it
up
is.
there if you hadn't gone down,
That's
open
correct.
this door to the and then the other one,
That's
and then you go
correct.
through there. So you have to go
That's
through a
correct.
process.
And it's
So
almost
it
like
sounds
there's
like
several
almost like a
tracks.
lifelong thing.
It is, and it keeps on happening. That's the thing. It just keeps happening. So whenever I said, "Okay, I'm just gonna kick back and, relax now. I've kinda got what I needed."
Nah,
No, now there's a whole
no.
new thing to go after, so
Did you ever come across anything and when you were learning that you went, "That was unexpected," like, "What?" What something that
yeah.
really caught you by surprise?
Well, let's just say almost all of it. So
Okay. Sure.
yeah,
Yeah,
so, history, so a lot of this had to deal with, history, and then it had to
sure.
deal with traveling, and then it had to deal with the exploration of religions, and of course, we're coming from, um, my frame of time was, you know, a baby boomer,
Mhm.
post World War II. The American economy was thriving. We landed a man on the moon, the Cold War, all of that. So there was a great deal of concern and effort into one, making a living, one, doing, something pretty amazing with your life, and then, living the American dream.
Sure.
And all of that stuff started to change for me around 20 or thereabouts, even a little bit before, and which I started to think about things a little differently than kind of my society issues and my kind of family issues, and how
Okay.
to look outside of that envelope.
Right,
So
because most people
that was
have, how can I tell you, family expectations,
that's right.
societal expectations, depending on, what circumstances you grew up in,
That's exactly. And
you know.
I grew up in Southern California at the beach, and there was a and I did a lot of surfing. So that
Right.
was a very interesting kind of cultural experience
Sure.
to have. And it was a very kind of happy, free, and easy kind of experience.
Mhm.
And now things are a little bit different for me. Um, I kind of cherish all those ideas, and I cherish what I experienced, but I ended up having to kind of go down a different road and have different experiences. Again, I go back to the questions. The questions keep coming, and once I started to read Plato and started to recognize the Greek influence on kind of my life, about the nature of the question, how a question is formed, and the pursuit of trying to find the answer to the question, that's when I went, that's kind of who I am at this point. And then that
Let me
got
ask you,
coupled in with
when you got into this, when you started reading, all these, well, you go into these different schools of philosophy, or like you said, either Plato or Socrates, or, all these different, how can I say, I don't want to say, well, either belief systems or way that they interpreted life or the way it should be. Was this something, because I'm thinking exactly what you said. Here you are, you're a surfer in Southern California, all right? And the beaches, you have this, I'm sorry, I'm gonna say it. You have the stereotype of the surfer guy, all right? And then you turn and you're telling me, I said, I shifted away from that and went into studying, um, it sounds like giving things deep thought, because I can't imagine
yeah,
anybody reading Plato because I have
that's
nothing better
correct.
to do,
That's correct. That's correct. In fact, my library. So let's just say, before 19, I had my books. The amount of books that I had probably were like a couple of dozen. I now have essentially two libraries.
Wow.
Huge. So
Wow.
books now became one of the emphasis of my life. So
Let me
and
ask you,
and
did
then the
this,
reading of it and the pursuit of it.
I'm gonna say, when you did it originally, was it for an intellectual pursuit or was it a spiritual pursuit, or both?
I think for one, it was trying to answer a fundamental question, and that is, why are we here? And then the other one
Okay.
was, who am I? So I felt that there was a level of wisdom that I could explore that my upbringing didn't provide.
Okay.
So
So in other
yeah,
words, you went into, and I know a lot of people will do this, they'll go into what they think is just, I'm just gonna do this for intellectual purposes. And then along the way, the spirituality creeps in, if you want to look at it that way.
that's correct.
Uh Not because they were looking at it, because it's almost like you said, it'd be like, oh, you're getting all soft. No, I'm just studying this stuff because I want to see what these guys were doing back in Greece in those times. When
And it's not just Greece that I'm interested in.
with
It's that whole Mediterranean, Asia
okay,
Minor, Egypt, up there
okay.
in England. Yeah, there's quite a bit of information that I was interested in.
Well, there was
Uh,
so much, whether, I mean, you think of the Romans and the, conquest of Rome throughout all of Europe and the Mediterranean. I mean, there was so much going on, whether it was, BC or AD,
that's
and
correct.
they had, you had your historians, the ones that were, and the philosophers and things of that nature. And some of the stuff you read it and you have to, like, I got to really read this like 3 times because I don't get it. The way that things.
Yes, yes. I totally understand what you're saying. It's
like
like there was another world over there in which intelligence and education was, uh, well, at least education for certain people was very, very important. And of course,
So
the
were you
people that are
doing,
writing are the ones that are the privileged, so to speak.
Well, they're finding even now, archaeology-wise, that a lot of these stories that some of these historians were talking about ancient cities or ancient civilizations, which sometimes they were thought were not for real, they're discovering some of these cities or some of these locations that these historians were describing did actually exist.
Yes. And guess what?
Um,
There's
what?
also others that are down at the bottom of the ocean about 300 feet or more.
Okay. What are we talking like
So,
along what around in the inside the Mediterranean or off the
yeah,
coast of
yeah,
okay.
yeah. And a number of other places. So,
Right. I
the
know that
earth got
there's
hit.
the other day they came up, they found a ship right off the coast of Sardinia. All right. It's in the waters of Sardinia, and it's as a matter of fact, it's got those wine canisters that you see from Roman times
Yeah,
totally intact in there. All right. And they say they believe that and it's the water's not really that deep where they found it. That they say they believe there's a bunch of other ships like that in that area. Um, and the truth is, you never think of the Mediterranean as being so rough that ships would sink. But yeah,
right.
there's a lot of things that, as far as archaeology is concerned, um, that yeah, I'm sure that there is as far as things waiting to be discovered. What do you Was there any time, how can I say, was there any time period that you found more fascinating than the other or something that you read? And the reason why I say this is there's a version of history that's put out, and I'm going to say generalized history. I'm not going to talk about something that's in depth. But then when you really start to study it or you start to read about it, you're like, wait a minute, this is not what I thought it was. This is not history as what everybody thinks about either this time period or this location or this civilization.
Yes.
Did you come
That
across
happens all the
something like
time.
that? Like what? Give
That
me an
happens all the
example.
time, which makes me start to question, what it is that our education
Oh, here we go.
is
I love it.
teaching us, right?
Yes.
So what is our true past? So, and
Sure.
what can we know from our true past?
Yes.
And is it necessary to understand our true past
Yes.
versus the past that has been told to us that might have a lot of misinformation and inaccuracies to it?
Sure.
So,
And I think that's a problem because what was it, to the victor go the spoils? And I don't know if I'm quoting this, but I think part of it is the ability to write history the way you want the history to play out. I don't know if you've heard about how when this was around the Renaissance and all these other time periods when these patrons would have their paintings done, their portraits,
yep,
but these masters were told like, "Hey, make me look good," you
yep,
know, take off that double chin and the
yep,
wrinkles, stuff like
yep,
that. And I think that a lot of times, history, they've done the same thing with history, a lot more than just, let's say, taking off a few wrinkles as far as exactly what happened or who did what or what was and then after a while, everybody that could have said it didn't happen that way dies. And there you go. Then you have that version.
and then you have the people trying to understand what happened before and then writing about it. So, I think part of our old epic stories still contain an element of history to it, and it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
fascinating to read what they were talking about,
Okay.
and because you start seeing what was important. So, I've learned to, and this is kind of fascinating because this kind of goes back to like, is there anything that you've actually found? And yeah, I mean, there's all this new information that I found, but there's also the way in which something is shaped.
Okay.
That is actually more interesting to me is, why would this particular thing be shaped this way? And since I wrote a book called Interviewing Jesus the Man,
Yes.
most of the material that I was interested in was trying to understand the historical context. So,
Okay.
but, you know, when I wrote it, I finally realized, hey, you know what? I better start putting something down on paper from all the things that I've researched. So I researched a
Okay.
great deal of history, Greek history, Roman history, Egyptian history, Hebrew history, the religions of those areas. And, I'm not a very good linguist, so I didn't get into the language of it. And I haven't read anything from original sources because I'm
Mm-hmm.
just I just don't have that ability. So I have to rely on what other people are
on the
translating
translation
for me. So, but there are, you finally start looking at big pictures and you start seeing what was important and what isn't important. Then I started reading the anthologies of all the kind of the spiritual literature. So I have, the Nag Hammadi library, and I have the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I have the Apocrypha, and other books that are, the forbidden books of the Bible, and things like that. And again, you get a different point of view because these people now we have the writings. So at least whether it's a full account of all the writings, but you have an account of a great deal of writing. And from that, you can start gleaming new information. So,
I imagine that there's also a consensus among these different sources.
Or there might be that, okay, these ideas no longer are suitable for the way in which the culture wants to embrace this information, and this becomes heretical, and Christianity is very good at that.
Oh yeah.
Which makes me believe that maybe the theology has been manufactured, so to speak, and it is different than what Jesus was presenting.
I believe, and this is how's this? I suspect it, but without doing the firsthand research like what you've done, I'm hesitant to say one way or the other, but I do believe it. Yes, I do believe it because the feeling I got as far as the early Catholic Church, I'm gonna even later on, was.
Are you Catholic?
Yes, I am.
You are? Okay, this is fascinating.
Yes.
There you go.
And you could tell that there everything the divinity of how, as far as Jesus or anything having to do with Jesus, whether it was the apostles, his background, we're talking about the Virgin Mary having to be a virgin, all that, whether it's true or not, I'm not saying, but you could tell that the belief systems, once it became an organized religion, and I think like all religions, even before Catholicism, it's power. You have to like make your followers believe in something. And yeah, I do have a feeling that Jesus's original message, somewhere along the way, it got either corrupted or changed, or there was stuff, if not lied about, omitted. How's that? And I'm being nice.
Yes. That I totally agree with it. When I read, when I really started to look at all of one of the things, well, let me just go back. So what I did is I took all of his sayings and I said, okay, there is a group called the Jesus Seminar, and they set out to kind of look at all of the sayings of Jesus, and they catalog them by giving them a color code. So they went, okay, red is the most likely thing he said. Pink is just below most likely. He probably said this. Gray, maybe not. Black, absolutely not. He didn't say this. So I decided, okay, I'm going to take all of those reds and pinks and put them down on paper. Okay, 25 pages. 25 pages of his sayings.
Okay.
That's a lot.
And then they color coded it.
Red or pink. Okay, so I'm just using it. These are things that he said or most likely he said. Okay. So now I break it down into other subgroups. So he talked a lot about money. Okay. How about food? Yeah. Okay. How about kingdom of heaven? Oh, kingdom of heaven. These are all very fascinating. Oh, he has 22 sayings of the kingdom of heaven, and there are 9. I think there's 10 themes. 10 themes of the kingdom of heaven. Not one of them mentions sin, salvation, and you're going to hell. Not one.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
But he is being presented as somebody who is going to essentially send you to hell. What?
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yes.
There's no sin, no salvation, no going to hell in any of those sayings, which are his most potent of all of his sayings when it comes to what he says the kingdom of God is like. Kingdom of heaven or kingdom of God.
Right.
So you have the mustard seed. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. The kingdom of heaven is like a strong man. This kingdom of heaven is, like leaven. this is not about sin.
No,
It's
it's
not.
not.
It's about process.
Yes.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yes, it is.
So
But
be like the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. What happens? Well, when you plant it, it grows and becomes a place for, the birds to live in. What does that tell you? Right? So
exactly.
anyway, that made me.
There is no I know what you're saying there as far as that loop. And let's face it, well, in Christianity, that looming thing, you don't, because you're going to end up in a hot place,
Right. Okay. So this is really fascinating. Why would it change? Because you were saying power. So
Yes,
what
of
is it that
course.
they're doing for one, power, and two, disempowerment?
Yes.
So the
Well,
question is why are you being disempowered? Jesus said, you're going to be able to do it. Everything that I do, you can do too, if not better.
because that
Right. So he's not saying, hey, now worship me. He never said that. Bow
right.
down to me. Don't work. He doesn't say that. Some other
Mm-hmm.
people put words in his mouth that said that, but he's not here to be worshiped. That's idolatry.
Right.
Anyway,
But the thing is this, that people don't realize that even before that, religions up to that time, that was the norm. Whatever your god was, or gods, whether monotheistic or pantheon or whatever, that thing of the god, and you had a priesthood or some type of temple. So I think that for Jesus to say something like that was like totally out of the norm of the way spirituality was handled during those times.
well,
Because
definitely for his Hebrew culture, it was
yeah,
because the high priests and the priests had a great deal of power
yes,
in their
yes,
society. And so when he was saying the kingdom of heaven is inside of you, that immediately threw out the temple,
of course.
right? So if the kingdom of heaven is inside of you, why do I need to go over to that temple? There you
Let me tell
go.
you, that's a big
Let me
problem
tell you, there you
for
go.
a lot.
Holy
That's a
cow.
big
Wait a minute.
yes,
So
yes,
what's going on here? So what's going on is that there seems to be another um, concept in which one group gets power and another group is disempowered.
right.
Okay. So the level of disempowerment is something that we need to really pay attention to. So how do you go about and re-empowering yourself? Well, for one thing, you need to sacrifice your own God that you think is a God, when in reality, it's not. It's an idol. So that's where I am.
Well, no,
You have to kind of
the
go through and get rid of all of that and just say, these are power mechanisms to keep
sure.
me from understanding, one, who I am. So if we go back and we say, God, the Old Testament says, I am that I am. What about me? Because my spirit, my soul is in complete congruence with the energy of the divine.
Yes.
And if
And
that is the case, then I should be doing everything that I can to make sure that I am who I am,
and
not
I'm going to
who
say
I'm
that
not.
I'm going to use the example of the Catholic Church, because that's what a lot of what's in Catholicism is the intercession of the
Yes,
priest, the intercession of a saint, the intercession of the Virgin Mary, but in other words, there's always that you need a go between
yes,
to
a
access, like you
mediary.
said, divinity. You
Yeah,
know, when a person, I want to say a human being, is put in that position, that's when you get the fear of you either do whatever you need to appease or escape punishment, or when I ask people, because you're thinking that I don't have that ability to connect with the divine directly. I have to go through somebody else,
that's
and
right.
hopefully they'll put in a good word for me, the hookup.
That's right. And so once you finally, this is the other thing that happened with me, is so I kind of had an epiphany when I was reading the Gospel of Thomas.
Right.
And in it, I was like, there's no one to go to. At the end of all of this stuff, there is no God you go to that's like, the person behind the curtain. There
Right.
is no one there. What is there though? Right. And so now you start having to go down a different road as to what is the nature of matter, what is the nature of energy, what is the nature of consciousness, how do all of those concepts and realities actually interweave with each other. So, and I think
Do
that,
you think that, for obvious reasons, do you think that Jesus's humanity was put on a back burner because they had to make him look more divine?
yes,
Um,
yeah,
because you can't be the son of God and be that human. How's that? Be quiet, Ginger.
that's correct. So, and of course, who was supposed to be the God at that time was Caesar, and the Son of God was his son. And so
Mm-hmm.
now Christianity has to go along with this other alternate parallel universe
Let me ask: do
when it
you think
starts to develop.
what do you think? Looking back at what you researched, what do you think was the attraction for early Christians? All right.
That there was actually a divine, this is very important. Okay, so everybody felt that the gods and fate and destiny were already written and that you really couldn't have any type of experience with them without some type of contract. Okay. So Jesus comes along and says, there's no contract. You're it.
Right.
Okay. So what he was showing and what he did and what I am totally convinced was going on is that there was this floodgate that opened on a mystical level that connected all these people to each other and to the divine in a way that they hadn't experienced before.
Right.
And that was what was so important and so powerful. However,
Yes.
you can't have all those people having these kind of individual experiences undermining essentially the Roman Empire, because
Yes.
that's what it was. So Rome, funny thing is Rome, this is really interesting. Rome said every person every day has to make some motion, some thought, some sacrifice, some money, something you have to give to Caesar every day. And the Jews at the temple were sacrificing every single day to Caesar. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't
Okay.
know that.
So the pious Jews were saying, "Hey, this is a sacrilege. You can't be making these types of sacrifices to Rome every day." But they wanted
I
everybody in
always
the empire to
thought,
do that.
to be perfectly honest, I always thought of the Romans as being very tolerant of the religions of the lands they conquered, and
They
that all
were.
they cared is if you pay your taxes
That's
and you
correct.
let them run the show.
That's
That's it.
correct. That's it.
But you're telling me
They
here that they
want
want
peace. They wanted to know everything that there was in their empire.
okay.
And then this was something new.
Okay, okay.
So
I see
now they're
what you
going, now
mean.
wait a minute, what is this thing?
All
And
right.
how come these people are worshiping not Caesar, but they're looking towards someone else? Well, wait a second. They started shaking their head going, wait, we don't know what this is. And we don't know if we want this. So
Okay.
eventually in the second century is when things kind of really started to turn south or bad for the Christians. I mean, obviously in the middle of in the 60s, there were the persecutions in Rome. But when you look at the size of the Roman Empire, it wasn't like a purge like you see with the Nazis, with the Jews in the 30s and the 40s. There was none of that at
Right.
that time. But there were times when they went, okay, this religion is actually not a religion at all, because they won't participate in any of the festivals. They've rejected
That's
all
okay, because
of
I
the
was thinking,
festivals.
you know what? I would think
Whoa.
these early Christians would probably be so disorganized that who was paying attention to them? However, I could see that if they weren't participating, somebody would notice it, like, "Oh,
They
we're
were
having
not
the festival
participating
of Lupercalia, whatever." Oh,
So you kind of were talking about like religion was about power and all that. Actually, I think
yes.
that there were other elements to that. And one of the elements, and this is a very important part, when you have decided to participate in, say, the Passion of Jesus, and you go through the stages of the cross,
Yes.
That event is a mystical connection to this particular passion. It is a mystery play. You are participating in a mystery. And by participating in a mystery, you yourself are embedding that in your mind and in the reality of the space. Okay, so it's you and your culture. You're doing something like that. When you go back and you look at what the Egyptians were doing, they were playing out mystery plays, mystery ideas that were associated with the zodiac and the motion of the stars. And they knew that there had to be a level of order for everything to work properly and for everybody to kind of be part of this big thing called Egypt, in which we were all working towards the building of this great empire and this great place and this great idea. And we are all blessed because of the Nile.
Right.
So why would they be thinking that way? Well, because there was a huge cataclysm, not just one or two or three, but multiple cataclysms that started in the year around 11,800, and it just kept on going all the way through to the middle of the second century BC or second millennium BC.
I wasn't aware of that. You know, you
So
always think of
the flood, that flood, it existed, but it was only one part. But that was at the tail end of a disaster. So there were all these catastrophes that were taking place, and there was absolutely no order at all. So,
right. And I understand that part of the thing is that you're hoping that by doing something, the god or gods or whatever is like, because what else have you got left? Because back then they didn't have the technology to understand weather patterns or earthquakes
that's
or whatever the
correct.
case.
So we're starting to see calendars with all those stone circles starting in the year like 10,000 BC or 9,000 BC. Why? Because they all of a sudden there were seasons.
Yes.
This is bizarre. We had mild seasons before that. If you go back and you read all, it was like,
in other words, something that was out of the norm is what you're talking about.
Seasons. All of a sudden, there's a season. What happened? Well, the Earth tilted 23.5 degrees. What happened at that point? Disasters.
How long did that tilt take? What span of time are we talking about?
It could have happened over the course of a couple of centuries or millenniums.
Okay.
You know, went from zero, right, straight up and down.
Right, straight up.
Right, that way.
Exactly.
So what was happening? So if something's straight up, I've been trying to think about that. If something is straight up, if the Earth is at straight up and it's spinning this way, everything that you look up in the sky is just going to go around in a circle, right? But if it's tilted, that means that one part of the sky is going to be arced. It's going to move in a different direction. Okay, so it's going to be coming down. It's going to go through its whole big cycle from one place on the horizon to another place on the horizon. My feeling is that it probably went up and down. Like the sun might have just kind of always went up and always went down, I would say within a very narrow space, right? Whereas if you look out now on the horizon, you know, where summer solstice is, it's way the heck over there. And then in the winter solstice, it's way over there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't like that before. Things were much more stable. So
right, exactly. I would think that with your axis being up like this, your seasons are very, how can I say it? Depending, of course, where you lived in the earth, it was very all the time. It was mostly the same thing. No surprises.
It wasn't like as drastic as what we were seeing.
Yes.
So there was all of a sudden there was this drastic elements. Like, how come there's all of this snow all the way down in Iran, to present day Iran, where all this water just showed up? Literally, there's 300-400 feet of water that used to not be there. Now it is. So now everything's submerged and it's all been washed away. I mean, the disasters were, are quite remarkable of what happened. So anyway,
and what do you think? These civilizations, they all interpreted it, or
they all had to? Okay, well, here's the thing: they all had to figure out how, because they were pretty much hunting and gatherers, How are they
Yes.
going to survive now with all these seasons? And how are we going to cultivate food?
Right.
So the domestication of animals and the beginning of agriculture occurred right around that around 10,000 BC or a little bit before.
Right, which is when you start seeing all these cities being
That's right. So
built
now we have
and stability.
civilization, and so what do we see with these civilizations? Someone, I don't know who, but someone was showing them how to build a civilization and become and start cultivating the land for food.
Yes.
It wasn't part of them, but somebody, whether they were gods or other beings, other humans from other
Right.
places, were showing people how to do things that they
Sure.
didn't know how to do before.
Yeah, I think we were, like you said, whether depending again where you were at, either you followed herds around if you were a hunter gatherer,
Yeah,
if you lived by the sea, but you ate, what the sea provided.
yeah.
But
Very simple life. Then all of a sudden everything changed. So that was one thing. So the reason why that was fascinating to me is when you when you get into Christianity, you get to the very end of the Bible. It's like, okay, so you start off in Genesis and then you move all the way
Mhm.
through all that long stuff, and then Jesus shows up, and then you go through this period, and then you read the last book of the Bible, which is Book of Revelation. It's like, okay, what's going on here?
Okay.
You start reading all those things, and you're going, where did they come up with those ideas? And when Jesus is supposed to have been saying all these things about the end times, where is all this? Where did all this come from? Is it just from his imagination? Is it because he was God and he knew what was happening? What? So that has always been in the back of my mind. Where did all that come from? Well, now I'm starting to realize that there were versions, there were things that happened that are part of the collective memory
Okay.
in that whole region, whether you're in like the area of Turkey now, the Eastern
Mhm.
Mediterranean, Egypt, all the way out to Spain and beyond. All kinds of that whole region of the Mediterranean region all have horror stories to tell you about what happened on a climatic basis, how the weather changed, how the earth changed, how the animals were killed, how the sun,
Yes.
how all this fire hit the earth.
Yes.
Okay, so you're seeing little remnants of these catastrophes, because there were many. One of them
Mhm.
started with, you'll see one, not the only one, but you will see one in the book of Exodus, where the Jews are leaving Egypt. And what happened? There were all these plagues, there was all this things that were happening. Well, when you go back and you start looking at the archaeological and then you start looking at the geological records, those things that happened were what was going on at an earlier age. They were experiencing those things.
What was it? Like a couple of years ago, they found what they believe is the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah,
Mhm.
and that they were basically leveled by what they call fireballs.
Yes. So what happened? Okay, here's I mean, this is like kind of I hadn't thought about this. I didn't even know about this. I'm really starting to trying to understand the stars, because, you know, I lived, it's like I got to the point where it's just like, hey, how come these stars are up here? What are they? Right? I've always been preoccupied by other things. But within the last year, I just go outside and just look at the stars. I'm totally amazed. Well, they're going through their own procession, they're going through their own cycle. And there was a time when it, there when things really were not the way they were. We think that everything is like all uniform and they've always been this way. Well, they
Right.
weren't. So there are theories now, and there's several things that I'm reading, and it's like really starting to, it's starting to sink in just how difficult this period was. Somewhere around about 12,000 years ago or more, a supernova exploded. And it
Okay.
just sent out, it's like, I think it's like somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000, light years away. Well, anyway, it exploded. And all of this material from that explosion smashed into our solar system and into the earth. And it sent all kinds of things from way out there into our solar system. So now we're being bombarded by all these comets and all this other fragments from all these different sources. Now, the question is whether or not they were from outside our solar system or inside our solar system. There is speculation now that Venus wasn't a planet about 5,000 years ago.
Really?
It just emerged out of Jupiter. And things were spitting out of Jupiter. All these fireballs were spitting out of Jupiter. And when they just sent the stuff out, when our sun or our planet revolved around the sun, we came smashing into all of that debris.
Wow. I had not heard of that about as far as Venus. But I know Jupiter is huge, but
yeah. Okay. So the question is when in human storytelling was Venus ever around? I mean, let's just go back and look at the storytelling from all these different cultures. There's no Venus. It's Mercury, it's Mars, it's planet Earth, it's Jupiter, it's Saturn. It's the moon and the sun. There's no Venus. And then all of a sudden, Venus shows up.
And Venus is you can see it.
It's called the morning star.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it ends up showing up now all over the world in all of these cultures, in all of these stories, that all of a sudden this star, the morning star, appeared. Where was it before? It smashed into it. It came crashing into our solar system and disrupted everything. It threw everything out of balance.
So do you think that because of that, that was one of the effects or the causes of things that happened?
Yes.
But like you said, let's say we had an asteroid.
Yeah, like all of a sudden there was an ice age and now there's no ice age anymore.
Right, yeah.
There was an ice age, there's no ice age anymore. All of a sudden the Earth is getting just pummeled by all this fiery fragmentation, which is all the fire coming from sky. It happened and is part of our collective memory. And after that event, the world was shattered.
Yes.
There are things, and I'm sure you know, right? The mastodons that are up there in Siberia.
Right, and that you find in Siberia now all the time.
Right. And so what is it? They were alive when they died of the cold.
Yes. Yes.
And the food that they were eating, get a load of this, the food that was in their stomach, which was preserved, was from there in the north, up there like at the Arctic Circle. Okay. They had just eaten food that was in the south of Russia. So all of those time zones, right, or all that distance from the lower section to the top section on an instantaneous level, these animals died with fresh food in their mouths and in their stomachs.
Exactly.
What happened?
We're talking here about a very swift climate change. Really
all of a sudden, something just happened instantaneously that they would die. And that it's like the whole earth, the whole skin of the earth, everything just shifted and moved. The poles shifted, the earth, all the crust, everything just broke up. Things sank, other things rose. All of a sudden, the Sahara Desert, or the Sahara, which is northern Africa, went from wooded, savanna, tropical, to a desert. In a sense, overnight. How'd that happen? So the Egyptians left. Okay. So now there's like this 6,000 year period of time in which, or 5,000, whatever it is, they call it the blank period. They don't know what happened. They just left. And then they came back and started all over again with all this new
ideas. To that same area off around the Nile?
Yeah. Because the Nile completely got flooded and it was completely shifted all over. Possibly even dried up. I don't know all that. So, I mean, that's,
Well, no, but you always hear that the Nile without the Nile, there could have been no Egypt as far as the civilization.
That's correct. You would not have an Egyptian civilization without the Nile. In fact, there's, you have the Indus Valley in India, and you have the Mesopotamian plateau with the Tigris and the Euphrates, and you had the Nile. And those were the three huge areas where they call that, historically they call that the core of civilization. Those
The cradle
three
of
river valley
civilization.
systems were really, heated up and thriving.
Yeah, that area between the Tigris and the Euphrates.
Yeah.
As far as ancient civilizations were concerned.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I've been to Turkey, and I've been over on that side, Lake Van and Mount Ararat, and let me tell you, man, I got there, and it was just like, oh my God, I feel like I am home. That is how I felt when I got over there. I was right at the base of Mount Ararat, and like, holy cow, I feel like this is where I came from. I knew it. It was in my bones. I knew it. The other place that, I've kind of done some traveling. So the other place I felt like that level of kinship to was Rome. So there you go.
Have you seen that they've been, and this is, I'm going to segue. Have you seen that people have been defacing the Colosseum? I'm very upset about that.
Why?
I have no idea.
Oh, they just like inscribing their names in it?
Well, yeah, there was one. First, there was one that did something like, and they're saying, well, they didn't know. I'm like, how can you not miss, like, it's a Colosseum. All right. And then now I heard another second person that did it, a woman. I was like, I don't get it. What is this?
Same thing's happening in Egypt at some of the temples.
Really? You're kidding.
People are just deciding they just want to etch their name into the columns. It's kind of weird.
I don't understand that. I just don't.
Either. You and I come from a different cloth. We are completely from different cloths.
How can I say? I see it as whatever it is. If it's a historical thing, whether I like it, I don't like it, it's pretty, it's ugly, I don't care. It's like, okay, leave it. I have a lot of respect for historical stuff. Let's face it, there's just very few of it left behind. As far as
exactly.
Why would you want to deface it?
We have to have some level of preservation of it. So
now let me ask you, so you went to all these places and you had like the aha moment, like, hey, this is great.
Well, at Mount Ararat, so that's where, Noah's Ark is supposed to be, at the top of Mount Ararat. But I had a real strong connection to that place. And then the other one was in Rome. So I was walking around Rome, just, I've been here before. I know it. And I loved it. So.
Well.
Have you been to Rome?
No, I have not. But
it's a treat.
And that's the thing that, what was it now? That's why I think that even without me being there, when you think of people doing that to historical places, and I'm thinking to myself, whether besides the fact that you're defacing it, you're like robbing every other tourist, that wants to go see the Colosseum without, hey, so-and-so is here, whatever. I'm just making stuff up here, but.
No, I get it. And that's not what I came here for. I don't want to see your stuff on there. However, graffiti's been around for a long time.
I know.
So,
let me ask you that you when you went, was there any other place besides, I'm going to say this. Did you ever find like, how's the thing? Not besides the feeling of saying, I've been here before. Did you ever had, I'm thinking, even though I know you've read about a lot of these places that you've gone to, did you ever have what they call one of those lucid dream experiences where basically you were seeing what this place looked like back whatever time, not modern times?
No, I haven't had that experience. However,
okay,
there is a however here. Okay, so from my earliest memories, I have always been a dreamer. I've always just remember dreams, have dreams. And it's important for me to keep my connection to myself, to the dream world, right?
Right.
So I'm not a real big fan of alcohol or drugs or anything, or even just, medical drugs, because it messes up this connection that I have that I need.
Okay.
Well, so I'm 8 years old and I have a dream and I go, I have no idea what that's all about. I'm 10 years old. I have no idea what this dream's about. I can't even describe to you what the dreams were. Okay. They're about places, inside buildings, all this kind of stuff. I have no idea. Okay. I'm with So I was part of a group that built a sacred circle in Turkey. And
Okay.
what we had to do is we had to drive around to every single border with the exception of Greece and touch the border and bring back dirt. Okay. So
Okay.
that meant we went to Georgia, Armenia, Iran, Iraq, it's Syria, and then up to Bulgaria. So we're on the very eastern edge over in the Iraqi area. And I walk into a building and I went, oh my God, this is the dream I had as an 8-year-old.
Oh, like a
And then we
deja
go
vu
to
moment?
another town. We go to another town and we go into another building. I went, oh my God, this is the building that I was in when I was 10. So I didn't have what you're talking about, but I had other experiences
That's
where
well, I know that but it sounds like a deja vu moment, but
there was a
years in
deja vu
between
moment
one point and
from
the
a
other.
dream. It's a deja vu moment from a dream in which it took, what was that, 30 something years? Yeah, 30 years for it to pass.
How about meeting? You know how sometimes, what they call, whether you want to call it synchronicity. Did you ever have those moments of synchronicity, whether you were at a certain place or you met a certain person or things that happened that you look back at and you go, this was meant to be? Like,
Okay, so I've been open up to the idea of just allowing. Okay, there's two things here. Like sometimes you just have to set a plan, you have to write it down, and you have to go after it. Okay, other times,
yes.
it's like me was I'm going to write down questions, and at one point I said, I'm having all these dreams and I don't know anything about them, and I don't know the language to it, and I don't know how to interpret that. I end up, because this is kind of addresses your point, I end up
Okay.
going to a party and I meet this guy and he says, hey, have you ever been to the Jung Institute? And I had been reading Carl Jung. And I said, no, I don't even know anything about it. And he says, oh, yeah, it's a great place if you want to have your dreams interpreted. I go, really? He goes, oh, yeah,
And you're
out of
like,
the blue, right?
isn't that great? That's
I
what
go,
I'm talking
really? And
about.
he goes, oh, yeah, what you do is you call them up and they'll set you up with a therapist so that you can do a Jungian analyst with a Jungian analyst interpreting your dreams. So that happened to me. And of course, the other thing that happens to me is, since I'm so interested in reading books and things like that, books just show up,
Oh yeah, God.
you know,
Yes.
and I don't mean it
Yeah.
like they just like, all of a sudden there's a book on my floor and where'd that come from? Like, manna from
Right,
heaven.
right.
But no, literally, it's like I'm over here. Hey, this book seems to be calling me, or I go to the library. This. So book seems to be my connection to.
Okay.
I guess they're my oracles. Okay, so
Sure. Yeah.
instead of
No,
having
I
an
understand.
oracle at Delphi that's sitting over, a vent, inhaling all kinds of Gnostic fumes, I go to libraries, or I'm at bookstores, or I just find books, and now those books are like seeding me and now helping me grow because of the very thing that I need. So that's
Right.
part of what
And
happened.
it's the thing that, how can I say it? And sometimes the only impetus behind it is the thought of it. That you
That's
might
all.
think,
Sometimes that's it.
hey, I'm thinking, well, what would be a good thing to read or something along those lines, something that you're thinking about, and all of a sudden circumstances come around and there you are.
Well,
Whether it's one in particular or whether you're open to like something different.
yeah. Well, so case in point, just recently, like last summer, I just started looking up at the stars and I go, God, I don't know anything about this stuff. Nothing. I don't know the names of the stars. I don't know. I just, they're always there. They're in the background, right? And I don't pay much attention to them. So finally I started to think, hey, you know what? Let's just go out there every night and just say hello to them.
Mhm.
And the one that seemed to be the one that I recognized was Orion and
Yeah,
the
Orion's
other
belt.
stars of the constellation of Orion. So every night I went out there and I just was looking at it and I was praying to it and I was just thanking it. And I was just like, hey, you know what? How about you give me some information?
Yeah.
I'm always open to information. Is there any wisdom? Right. So I would do this on a regular basis. Like I wouldn't almost every night. And finally, things are starting to show up based off of the stars, the information of the stars. So I did since the beginning of June, I've uh, I just started reading all the books on stone circles
Okay.
and energy lines
Mm-hmm.
and all that material. And so what I'm finding is that there's a direct connection that all of our ancestors had to the stars that we don't have anymore. But the stars are telling stories.
Sure. I
They're
mean, you
always
see
telling
so
stories.
many
There's all this kind of information that comes
temples,
through
or
those.
they were aligned certain
That's
ways, and
correct.
it was and almost precisely, by the way,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
in the
There was
same
no,
direction.
yeah. So that's all very fascinating to me. So
And
anyway,
when you're
now,
thinking of, let's use the word primitive people,
yeah,
you
I
know,
don't mean, I just like our ancestors, right?
well, no, no, what I'm saying is that we think of ourselves as having all this technology,
Right.
and
Even our
astronomy and blah,
technology,
blah, blah, blah.
we know everything.
Right. It is like way back then. Yeah, even now, and I'm sure you've seen it, especially if it sounds like you've been to all these places where what's left of them, that even now they can't quite figure out how they built some of these things,
Yep.
whether it's the pyramids or other places
Yep.
that they look at them. And it's not like they built them. It's like they were done so well. Uh there's a
Exactly.
and it's not that you could say, well, this one civilization they had back in like 1834. This was in Oaxaca, Mexico, in one of the provinces in Mexico, where this is in that area where Chichen Itza and all these things were.
On the
They
Yucatan.
Right, on the Yucatan. They found these quarries of these stones that are like 1 to 3 tons. And because they found some other discoveries, and they were thinking, okay, they source these stones from this quarry. And they found that was one of the things, that this place was abandoned. Like, a lot of these places are abandoned. It's like almost like what you said, everybody drops everything and leaves. And even then, now, because everybody thinks, oh, the pyramid of Egypt is the one they can't figure out. Even now, they can't figure out. Forget how they built it. How were they able to transport some of these stones the way they did over some of the terrain from one point to the other, just to get to work on it? All right.
Yeah, who's involved with making exact shaped stones? All of them the same shape. Like, you have to have, like, I've done a lot of woodworking and metalworking, and so you can set
Okay.
up a whole process in which you have the same piece coming out all the time, right? Because you got these machines.
Sure.
You can't do it by hand.
Right.
It's almost impossible to do this stuff by hand on an industrial scale.
Right.
And
Right.
that's
Right.
the issue.
Exactly. And that's what we're talking about here.
Right.
This is mega industrial stuff sense. Well, you know what? That's really interesting coming from you, David, that you work with your hands
Yeah.
as far as building,
Yeah.
as far as
It's very
to
important.
to reproduce something without machinery. How would you be
Well,
able to
that's
do
a
it?
different story. I'm totally into tools, so I'm part of the.
Well, when I mean machinery, I mean like, how, like, you put a machine, or let's say a saw, that you can say, I'm going to cut it at this angle, and I know I can put a bunch of that I'm talking about what would be available, let's say, to these civilizations,
Yeah.
that you would think, okay, if these people only basically had tools,
Hand tools.
hand tools, right? Hand tools. That's it.
Like,
No,
what?
no.
All they had was a hammer and a chisel, and they did that? Go try
Uh-huh.
it. Please go try it. And tell me how you did. How many
Yes.
blocks of stone did you make today?
Yes. 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 And they even found close, there's
They're
a
22
very
point.
old
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of it. It's an old it's called Mitla. It's basically they had like an acropolis, and this was basically these people were chased out by the Aztecs. So this is pre-Aztec civilization. Not only did they build these things, they even had subterranean chambers that were carved into rocks and stuff.
Uh-huh.
And you're like, how did they do that stuff?
Yeah.
That's incredible.
And why subterranean?
Yeah.
So subterranean has something to do with the way in which energy works, right? So now it's all about
Oh,
energy
sure.
work. Okay. So what happens when you have an underground system, whether there's water in it or not, and now
Right.
you invoke whatever it is that you're invoking. So, for example, um, I went to Chartres Cathedral, and it happened
Mhm.
to be on it was either the 24th of December or the 23rd. So we're looking at the winter solstice.
Yes.
And I walked in, and of course, I just had this, oh my God moment.
I
Just,
bet.
and I'd already been to a number of other cathedrals, but this one, for whatever reason, just really struck me. And the children's choir was practicing for this, the Christmas Mass.
Yes.
And oh my God, I swear, this is a total cliche, but it sounded like you're in heaven, and you're looking
Right.
around, and there's, this whole space just keeps going up and up and up, and you got this music going. And I ended up having an epiphany. And so I'm standing at the crossing,
Uh-huh.
having this like mystical experience. So I've been thinking a lot about that. And I realized that whenever you have a sacred temple or structure on a ley line,
Yes.
when you go to that spot on an equinox or solstice,
Mhm.
it magnifies the energy. And they also
Interesting.
have underground scripts. So there's a whole underground system below this cathedral. So all of these ancient sites, for whatever reason, and I'm not really sure how this works on a metaphysical or an energetic level, but there seems to be chambers underneath these sacred spots. And so
Yes.
when you go and you start activating these spaces with your voice, with motion, with intent, everything is magnified. And that like vacuum or that underground space is resonating at a higher frequency, I think. And then because the whole building itself is a chamber of sacred geometry, in which
Yes.
it's all about frequency and how frequency vibrates. You've now walked into a system in which the under the ground, the building, the sound, and you on this day that's already highly energetic is vibrating at a super high rate. And boy,
I can imagine.
started having all kinds of new insights.
Well, and I hate to say it, I don't know what happened to Notre Dame, with the fire and stuff.
I know.
Do you know that they found a whole bunch of people buried underneath the altar more than they thought originally? Have you heard about all these
No, I haven't heard any of that. I have
they've,
seen a program
because
of them
they've been
building it.
forced to. Well, back then, if you had if you were a wealthy patron or somebody in the church, you got buried in the church, under the,
Right.
around the altar or whatever. That was like this is but they have found some tombs in unexpected places once they were doing the renovation of Notre Dame. And they're like trying to figure out unexpected people. How's this? Not somebody like, somebody that was well off or somebody that was high up in the hierarchy of the church.
Yeah.
So they're trying to figure out, well, why was this person interred there in Notre Dame?
Right.
You
Oh,
know,
interesting.
yes, I want to, I got to follow up on it. I drop those things and then I follow up a couple of months to see, now with DNA, they can figure out a lot of stuff. But even then, sometimes you don't get the exact picture about like, let me ask him, David, let's say when you did this study, we're going to get back to Jesus. Do you think that looking at him, following him historically took away from his divinity or no?
I think he just put them in perspective.
Right.
So we have a theological understanding
Mm-hmm.
of him. In fact, that's pretty much all we have.
Sure.
So for me, I had a theological understanding, but then I started to ask questions that, because I was done so much building, it's like, well, we just want this building. And you can't just go with your hand, and we just want it like that. And you go,
Right.
okay, well, that requires engineering, that requires, building, that requires materials, that requires all, you just go down, and I call it nuts and bolts. Okay.
Right.
We need nuts, we need bolts, we need nails, we need, lumber. Is this all 2x4 or is this, 2x6s? Where are we going to transfer the load, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? You got to deal with these nuts and bolts issues. Otherwise, you're going to have a structure that's going to collapse on you. Okay.
Exactly.
So I went, okay, let's just break this whole thing down. And I'll just look at it purely from the point of view that he's got these sayings, and I know what the sayings are. And I've already done the study of it. And then I'm going to go ahead and compare it with the New Testament. And I'm going to say, okay, the primary thing about the New Testament is that he walked around a lot. So he said things and he walked around a lot. Okay, that seems to be the, things that are, I'm going to say, are like 100% true.
Yes.
Now we go, okay, let's go back and let's read the sources historically of what was happening at the time of the first century. Okay. So we have from 0, right? Because that's when Jesus was born, 0, right? So we have a whole new time clock calendar, right? And now he dies roughly 33 years later, okay? Or, there's some variation of what that time frame is. Well, what was going on? Okay, and then we also have another milestone, and that milestone is the Jewish and the Roman War, and it terminated in the year 70 with the destruction of the temple, and then a few years later, the destruction of Masada. Okay, so now we know there's some, we have some benchmarks here.
Yes.
So what was it like before that? What was going on? So what were the Romans doing? What were the Greeks doing before that? Okay, so if you keep going back in history, and back in time, eventually you'll just a lot of things will get lost. But if you kind of go back and just say, hey, what was very prominent in their minds? Well, Alexander the Great showed up, and after he died, then this area fell under the control of one of his generals. It was called Seleucid. And the other general down in Egypt was Ptolemy. Okay, so what did they do? Well, they were Greek, and they really didn't like, the Seleucid didn't like the Jewish religion because they thought the religion was stupid. And he didn't think it was very smart because the Greeks were interested in all this, Plato and Aristotle and the likes. And so they persecuted them. Okay, so now you have the Maccabean Wars. So then they, the Jewish people finally freed them. They freed themselves of the Greeks only for the Romans to arrive. Okay,
right.
So now you have all of this, they're now subjected people. Okay, and Jesus shows up during a time of subjection, in which Greco-Roman ideas are now prevalent in their land, and the priests have to make sacrifices to Caesar, like I mentioned to you before.
Yes.
People went nuts. They literally went nuts. And you had a king, Herod, who was not a pure-blood Jew. He was half Jewish because he was half Arab. People were furious over this. So there was a man by the name of Judas the Galilean. So this is where all of a sudden history starts to light up the whole universe here for me. There's a man by the name of Judas the Galilean. Funny, he's mentioned twice in the book of Acts.
Okay.
Well, I went, well, who is this guy? Because they just mention him in passing. Oh, well, and at the time when Judas the Galilean did his kind of thing, that's was so cavalier and so dismissive of it. I went, well, I wonder what Josephus Flavius has to say about this guy.
Okay.
So I got the book, on histories of this, the histories of the Jew. And I started to read that whole section about Judas the Galilean from Josephus's perspective because he lived there.
Okay.
A little after Judas the Galilean. So I would imagine, do you know anybody from the South? Do you know people from the South?
Yes.
Yeah. Tell me, what's it like when they talk about the Civil War?
Different perspective.
It was yesterday this happened.
Yeah, different perspective. Yes, absolutely.
I mean, my great-grandfather fought in that. They know.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. They know. Okay, so I went, the Jews have a very long memory. And they're going to remember this. So Josephus is going to tell me something, whether it's absolutely 100% accurate or if it's in the ballpark. This is really important. Okay. Judas the Galilean said, in effect, all you Jews, we freed ourselves from the Greeks, and now we're free. But now you Jews have decided we're going to take on, or we're going to accept Roman rule. And they're going to put all these puppets, whether they be the king or whether they be the priests, in our land, and they're going to tax us. And he said, if you get taxed and you accept the census, I'm going to kill you.
Oh boy. Okay.
Okay. And he did. So all these people in the Galilee, this is the Galilee. So this is where Jesus is from. This is where Jesus is preaching. So in the Galilee, Judas the Galilean went on this rampage and torched all these villages, killed all these people, killed all the livestock, killed all their way of living. Okay.
He's Jewish.
And he's Jewish. He just destroyed it all. It says, none of you belong to God. None of you believe in God. None of you want your freedom. And so the best thing for you is to all die. And I am the avenging angel, and I'm going to kill every single one of you. And he had a whole army, and he did just that.
Let me ask you, I was about to ask you, who is this guy? Because not everybody usually has the ability to like.
Yeah. I mean, so he was a rabbi. He was, and he had enough. He was furious with all these people finally just saying, oh, well, we'll just acquiesce to the Roman Empire and to Roman rule. And he was adamant. No, it's better to die than to do this. So he was on that roll. Okay. So guess what? Judas the Galilean went to all these villages. And then when you read the New Testament, Jesus went to the exact same places.
Okay.
So what is the first thing that Jesus says? Peace be with you. Why? Because the last time someone showed up with some people, he murdered them all.
Let me ask you, do you think the problem with Jesus was that they wanted a warrior and instead they got the guy that kept saying love each other?
Yes. Okay. So now the question is, we now have this thing called Jesus who brought this new idea. And my feeling is that he, it seems unlikely that he would not have gone. This is a double negative, but he went to India. He spent time in India. Right. So when I looked and analyzed all of his sayings, and I looked at, where the inspiration and where the sources would have come from, the East is a very prominent place where these ideas are originating from. They're not Hebrew.
Okay.
So there seems, and then there's all this tradition that Jesus was there and his name was Isa at the time.
Do you think he ever made it to Japan? Because I've heard a version of that too.
I can't address that. I can address that he spent time in India. So the question is how much time? When did he go? How did he get there? Okay, so I found out that there was a way that you can get to India. Now, what I have read is that the Silk Road was not open until Hadrian, who was in the 2nd century, and he was the emperor of Rome. It wasn't until he showed up that there was now a new connection to the Silk Road that went to China.
Okay.
And that would have been north. Okay. But there was another route that you can take to get to India. So if you go from Jerusalem and you go down to the Red Sea, you can catch a boat. And then from the boat, you can sail down the bottom of the Red Sea and then out the Straits of Hormuz, and you can get to the southern tip of Yemen. And then if you got there at the right time, the trade winds would blow towards the east. So you just put your sail up and you get in a boat and it would take you right to the west coast of India.
Okay.
And they knew where that was. Okay. And knew, which port to go to. And they did.
So the logistics are there as far as the possibility.
Okay. So then the trade winds, after about 6 months or so, would turn around and blow the other way. So if you timed it right, you go there and then come back with the winds behind you. So there was that route. Okay.
Because there's always, they say these years that Jesus was like, what was he doing with his time? That.
Well, most likely he was probably studying in some monastery at the base of the Himalayas.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So how would I, is there some way of like verifying that? All I can say is that there seems to be a couple of things that he is very in tune with. And there's a great deal of Eastern mysticism and Eastern theology that he is conversant with, whether it be Confucianism, whether it be Taoism, whether it be Buddhism, or whether it be Hinduism.
Okay.
He's well versed in it. In fact, his ministry is a highly Buddhist ministry because it is a ministry dedicated towards the dissolution of the ego. So as he even says, the more the Father kind of comes into him, the less I become, right? The less I become, the more God the Father takes on. Well, that's a very Buddhist concept. So he's now being infilling with his version of a practice that has Buddhist origins to it. So there was like no one else that was kind of like doing what he was doing and talking about. Now,
so this was because this doesn't sound like Jewish teachings kind of thing.
No, it isn't. So then when you get into the Gospel of Thomas, Thomas, and then you also get into the Gospel of John, there's a very strong influence of Hinduism. So Jesus will say, the Father and I are one. Okay, well, that's very Hindu, because the small self, you, and the big self, the divine, are one and the same. It's just size. So if I were to go down to the ocean and I had a cup or a bucket and I fill the bucket up with the water from the ocean, the water in the bucket and the water in the ocean are the same thing. They're not different. And that's the way the Hindus saw the self. So the big self and the small self are divine. They're one and the same thing. So when Jesus says that, he's saying something that is Hindu. That isn't Jewish. They don't believe that at all. They didn't think that way at all. That's not to say that they didn't feel like there was a Holy Spirit inside of them.
Right. But yeah, that's not the way they would have thought of explaining it. They never would have
gone down that other road. They just wouldn't have. That's not it, because there's God the Creator, and then we're the creation. And Hinduism blends, kind of dissolves that boundary. Okay. So the other thing that Jesus learned, and I explored this in my book, and that is, I call it feats of endurance. So what are feats of endurance? Well, raise your hand. How many people can go on a fast for 40 days out in the desert? Raise your hand.
Right? Let me tell you something. I'm hurting over 4 hours and I'm hurting. What are you talking about?
Right.
40 days.
So 40 days.
I'd be like, oh.
Thank you. Okay. And then, I'm going to conduct my ministry. I'm going to do a traveling ministry versus, say, John the Baptist, who would just say, hey, I'm over here at the River Jordan, and everybody come over here and get baptized. Or you can kind of go into the Essenes, who are living out in the desert, Qumran, and, maybe they had a couple of people that they would send out as emissaries, to kind of teach. But Jesus was teaching not in a school and not with normal people, right? He was going around he was rounding up all these, all these different people and all these different types of people. And he was going from town to town and village to village and little city to city all throughout the Galilee, getting followers. So the question is how many people followed him? Was it a lot? Was it little? Who knows?
Right.
But it kind of raises the question, or raised the question for me is like, well, what's the church? I mean, if you went from village to village to village in your whole time that you were going around doing all this stuff, how many times did you go back and visit the same place that you just left?
Exactly.
My guess is that he probably hit one or two, he probably hit a couple of them twice, maybe 3 times. So, and believe me, when you kind of go and do what he did, you start looking at the Lord's Prayer and you say, there's 5 things. So, the front end and the back end all are giving God, some level of glory and acknowledgement. And then the other ones are, food. So give me my daily bread. Don't, lead me not into temptation. And then, forgive those, right? Forgive those people, right? So I would imagine Jesus was using that as a template for wherever he went. into all these new villages and all these little new towns. So he'd go from place to place to place. And you know that the people, when he walked into these places, one, they just remember that guy named Jesus the Galilean that slaughtered, their family before, and he's showing up. So they're probably very suspicious. So he's saying, peace be with you.
And they're
And
like,
he's
huh?
trying to give them some spiritual insight and help them through their own ego and try to teach compassion. So
Right.
maybe some people liked it and some people didn't. And then some people followed him and probably most didn't. But he would keep on doing that. But that's how he used the Lord's Prayer in that manner.
Do you think that what led to, I try to think, without being there, and of course you studied that time period more. I don't, when you think about it, do you think his crucifixion really came about because the Jews, the whether it was the priest or I just had enough of him? Because I really don't think, I think he was flying under the radar as far as the Romans were concerned. Or am I wrong about that?
Nothing flew under the radar from the Romans.
Well, I'm talking in as far as executing somebody.
Okay.
Even though I know the Romans can be pretty bloodthirsty, but
people were aware of what Jesus was doing because it was kind of undermining the authorities, not only the political authority, the religious authority, and then also, in a sense, the Roman authority. But the Romans, they were kind of, as long as you weren't causing problems, as long as you were protesting, as long as you weren't, you were still paying your taxes, they were kind of tolerant about a lot of stuff. But they knew what you were doing. And so did the Jews. So they all had spies.
Right, but to me, I'm thinking that
in Turkey is that everybody
the Romans were, so this guy's walking around with a bunch of other guys
and
telling
women,
everybody love one another.
Women.
And women. Well, if you go with Mary Magdalene,
yeah.
And I'm thinking at it from a Roman perspective. It's like okay, so this guy's running around telling everybody love one another, turn the other cheek, that kind of stuff. Whatever. Okay.
Right.
I don't know. In other words, I don't, because I know that for the Romans, it was like, are you a threat to us militarily?
Right.
Can you come and, mount an army and come against us? Jesus doesn't fit into any of that.
And it was probably never, I don't think he ever raised any type of army the size of Judas the Galilean.
No.
So, I mean, I know that I think that there's an exaggeration, when it talks about how many people follow Jesus, and it was just like this huge multitude. And, there is mention of that he did have 60 disciples. So 12 was one thing. And then there were 60, kind of mentioned as a side note.
Well, and, I don't know if it's like, hey, when you come to town, we're going to go and listen to you versus the ones that traveled with him. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So getting back to the crucifixion. So Jesus decided it was time to, there was a point in which I felt like there was a blood sacrifice that he was willing to take and accept.
Okay.
So, obviously, the Passover is a great time because there is a type of theater that Jesus was aware of. I mean, he was a master publicist, so to speak.
Okay.
And he knew how to take, he understood when opportunities. So he either created his own opportunities or he always was taking advantage of opportunities. And the biggest opportunity that he had when it came to the Passover was to go down there and make a scene. And he did. And he accepted what he had to do as probably a voice of God talking to him, saying, now is the time to spill blood. And I think that there is this, again, it goes back to these mystery plays that I was telling you about earlier in our conversation. And that is, if you are enacting a particular play, you are making it real. And it's not just, it's like imprinting this reality into the world. And he knew how to do that. And so he brought with him this, one, the sacrifice, and two, turning the wine into, water into wine, And then there's the sacrament, which is very Egyptian, of taking something and eating of it, and then taking on the substance of that, because there's a
Right.
transmutation. And so that's
Transmutation, exactly.
alchemical. That's an alchemical
Yes.
reality of which Jesus was fully aware of. And he did the passion play, he did the sacrifice, and he provided that transmutational element. And those are really big issues. So now the question is,
do you think Jesus knew all along this was going to be his end, or was it when he was closer to the time of his death that he realized? Because you always hear that he was always aware that this.
Well,
that
let's
he was
just
gonna
say
have to
this.
do this.
This is how I felt. I felt that Jesus knew that by going out and doing his ministry, that was one, it was a quote living sacrifice, and two, that it was a death sentence, because he was literally going up against the powers that be, and he's already going up against people's preconceptions of what should be. So everybody was looking, and this is okay. So I didn't mention this, but I'm going to mention it now because I'm now thinking about it. So if you go back and you say, "Hey, what are the Jews thinking about when it comes to this Messiah? What is he supposed to be doing?" Okay, so what are the examples that I have that would key me into understanding what this Messiah is going to look at? Okay, so I'll go back and I start looking at my history, and you go, "Hey, look what Moses did to Ramses." Okay, that's a really good one. Okay, look what Joshua did. When he goes into Canaan and he takes over the Canaanites. Let's just go and look what David did to Goliath to preserve the Jewish monarchy and the Jewish state. And then look at what the Maccabees did when they pushed the Greeks out. Okay, so you got 4 really, really good examples of what it means to be subjected, and someone is going to come, they're going to be anointed by God to change the dynamic, to free this suppressed people from the oppressor. Okay? That's in their mindset.
Right.
So when people walked up to Jesus, they'd say, "Hey, are you the Messiah?"
Well, that's my point. All those examples that they fought. They actually fought like a warrior type of thing. And here's Jesus, and Jesus is not like coming around going, "You know what? We're going to overthrow these Romans and we're going to get them out of here."
And he didn't say any of that. Okay.
No, he didn't.
So he does exactly the opposite. He says, "Love your neighbor as yourself, walk an extra mile." I mean, there's all those, all of his teachings when it comes to just what to do, right?
Right. So it's
How to
like,
love,
was that what got
be
everybody all mad?
compassionate.
Was that he was not fulfilling what they thought? Because I
Right.
imagine they were waiting for somebody to come around and say, "Hey, I'm going to be the one that's going to get the Romans out of here, and we're going to."
And
The freedom
okay,
they're
so
looking
that
for.
happens. That happens again with another Galilean. So the Galileans, it's John the Baptist,
Yes.
Judas the Galilean, Jesus, and then you get Josephus, the guy that was writing about what was happening in first century Judea. Okay, he was I think he was a Pharisee. Yeah, I think he was a Pharisee. So he was part of the Jewish teaching.
Okay.
And he was part of a group that decided they wanted to get rid of the Romans. And they did. So the Galileans formed an army and went after the Romans. And if I'm not mistaken, it was in the valley, Armageddon Valley, where all of the book of Revelation says everything's going to happen. They went out, met the Roman legion, which is, that's the equivalent of a Panzer division,
Yeah.
in Nazi Germany. I mean, this is not anything you want to be dealing with, because you're most likely going to lose. Well, the Galileans defeated the Romans handily. They just destroyed them.
And then
So that is the idea, that there is this, someone is going to rise up and defeat
yes,
Roman.
exactly.
Okay. Well, Jesus he wasn't even part of that way of thinking.
So do you think that's what got him into trouble? I'm just
No, I
saying.
think he went down to Jerusalem. Okay, here's just think about this for a second. He goes down to Jerusalem at Passover, and there's, several 100,000 people from all over, the diaspora coming to make their pilgrimage to Jerusalem, to go through this whole feast and the Passover ritual. So you have an audience of 100,000 people. Well, what is the whole purpose of the Passover? It's Jewish liberation from the Egyptians.
Right.
Well, the Romans are going, okay,
Don't
I
get any
understand what
ideas.
this is about, but let me tell you, we're not letting anybody go around here starting any nonsense here. We're going to kill them. So Jesus goes in and he starts turning over the tables. So he was deliberately provoking people to have eyes on him, and it turned out to be the Jewish religious establishment. So the Romans got involved only after.
Right. That's what I meant. That they were
apparently
like,
the
like
Romans
we're
had
like
nothing to do with this. It was the Jews that said, "Hey, kill this guy. He's a troublemaker." And they're going, "Well, what did he do?" "Well, nothing really." "Oh, well, what do you want me to do?" So
exactly. And that's what you always feel like, that as far as the might of Rome, how's that? Jesus was just some guy walking around,
hey, believe
like
me, Pontius Pilate was really mean and vicious and nasty, and he'd
yeah.
killed a lot of Jewish people for just slight protests. He was
Uh-huh.
slaughtering them right and left. So
Oh
he
no,
had no
no.
problem doing that. But in this particular case, it just seems like, what is he really doing here other than disrupting, the money changers?
Well, I think like every it's like nobody wants to be used. And I'm sure Pontius is like, what are you trying to use me for? You
Well,
trying to get me to do the dirty work.
right. And so part of what Pontius Pilate is looking for, and this is part of the Roman way of doing things, is that all of the best positions and appointments and assignments all went to pure blood Romans. Okay,
Right.
so
Yeah, they were real big on family lines.
oh yeah, so it was like, okay, who's going to be the governor of the Syria? Okay, well that's like the best place to be. So that's going to go to this guy over here. And then how about Egypt? Okay, well that's going to go to this guy. Okay, well how about this little province in the total backwater land? That's going to go to a family that wasn't Roman but decided to become Roman a couple hundred years ago. And that's where he comes along.
So do you think he was just yeah, I see what you mean. As far as
he had everything to lose and nothing to gain.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I know that everything as far as Rome was exactly that. You keep the people, and we're getting our tax money, so that we can build roads and feed and clothe our armies, our soldiers, our legions.
That's right. And the best way to so there was two things that I can kind of use as an illustration. Okay, so the Romans are very much like the movie The Godfather, but on a big scale, right?
Okay.
Yeah, just that's where that comes from. That's who they were. That's the way it all worked. I mean, it was all about power, who had power, and they were exerting their power. And so there was that element. Okay. The other element is so one day I was in Las Vegas and celebrating my niece's birthday, and we were staying at Caesar's Palace. So I, parked the car, I walking into the front lobby, and all of a sudden it just hit me. And I went, oh my God, here I am. And I'm just going to say this represents Rome. Here are all the sculptures. Here's everything that represents Rome: the fighting, the sex, the gambling, right?
Right.
And when this all kind of came to me, not that, probably right after like 9/11. And so ISIS, at that moment, ISIS hadn't happened, in the Middle East, but it happened a little later. And I went, oh my God, what would happen if you dropped Las Vegas directly in the headquarters of ISIS at Raqqa? I wonder what would happen, right? I mean, here's one of those
Let me
intellectual
tell you something.
exercises.
That'd be it.
Like, what would happen if you put these two things together? They're not gonna work together. It's not gonna even close to being happening. Okay, so now I understand what the Greco-Roman world was like to most of the traditional Jewish people. So there was something of a problem here. So there was a couple of ways that you can deal with that. One, you can acquiesce and just say, hell, I'm just going to go and be, a Roman, or I'm going to kind of lean on, being part Roman, or really be Roman, really accepting this. The other one was like, well, I'll be kind of half Jew, half Roman. And the other one was like, I just want to go back to my traditional roots. And a lot of people went back to their traditional roots because they knew that was safe and they knew what it was. The other stuff didn't make any sense and it didn't seem to work very well for them. So when you're in this cauldron of change, there are those three things that happen.
Who are you more worried that's going to get mad at you, the Romans or God?
And so the Jews who were very devout realized that there was that element. Like, I'm going to go ahead and please God.
Exactly. That and I hate to say it because I don't really believe in God in those terms, but that when God came down on you, it wasn't good. It was like that kind of fear.
Enough, right?
Yeah.
So it was a very complex time, and Jesus was doing this ministry, and ministry because of who he was and what his mission was. Okay, the question now becomes: is there something in the cycle of the stars that pointed in this direction that he would show up?
What did
because
you find?
in the cycle of the stars are cycles of ages.
Okay.
And each age has its own determined direction. And this was a time with the age of Pisces that compassion, caring, more of the feminine energies are supposed to be reintroduced in the world. And Jesus was doing that. That's why the Magi, who are from the Persian area, the Iranian, Iraqi area, they were astrologers. They understood the meaning of the stars. And they knew that there was a cycle, and this was one of the cycles, and that there was going to be somebody, this teacher, right, that is going to show us what the new age is going to look like. And they knew. And they knew.
And when you look at that, when you go and the story of the three wise men, the Magi, they're not put off because they find him in a manger, because they're following the star.
Right.
Even though he's supposed to be, they understand in other words, what you said, what the stars say, we're going to believe it. We're not going to second guess it, because we find this king has been born, in one of the lowliest places. He's not in a palace, in other words.
Right. And this is in contradiction to the way in which the ruler of the world, the Roman, how he is born. Everything is like a complete parody. All the New Testament Gospels and part of the early Christianity is like a parody of what the kingdom of God looks like versus what the kingdom of the Romans look like. It was just the opposite. And if we understand that, we're going to understand a lot more of what the Gospels were about.
Oh, absolutely.
As well.
Yeah, there's a lot for thought there.
Yeah.
David, I want to thank you so much. It has been fascinating to speak to you because, like I said, you've gone there and you've done the legwork.
Well, thank you.
As far as research. All right. And, what's accurate, what's historically accurate versus what isn't. And sometimes I imagine that it's got to take a lot of effort especially maybe when you get more than one source that's telling you something different from the other. Like, okay, where's the truth in this?
That's right. Well, one of the things that I realized, and again, it's one of these moments where you go on and you start doing something and you don't have any clues to what is about to happen, but things started to happen. And that is, I started to realize that if you looked at the Gospels and you started to see where they were written in time,
yes.
And then I went, okay, let's just imagine I'm watching a movie. And if I'm watching a movie from the 70s, they're going to show, this car and that kind of hairstyle. And then if you go in the 60s, there's going to be a different hairstyle with a different kind of sayings. And then if you go into like World War II movies, you're going to see something completely different, right? And in a very short period of time, 30 years, movies are going to show you what your culture is going through.
Yes.
Between dress, what men and women are thinking about, what the motives are, what they look like, what they're engaged in, what their houses look like, what their cars look like, all of it.
Yes.
And as I was reading the Gospels, I went, hey, you know what was happening in the Roman Empire at this time? This. And see, there's this concept right there. There's all this little bleed through of different time through the Gospels that are not necessarily indicative of Jesus's time, but are indicative of the writer's time. And they are now talking and they're pointing their finger and saying, look, back here at the time of Jesus, this is what was going on. But they have their own kind of cultural slant from their own perspective because their perspective has changed because the world has changed. And the world changed really radically in the year 70 when the Jewish temple was destroyed.
I'm going to give you ourselves. If you've lived an X amount of years, in other words, that you have that advantage of looking back, let's say 40, 50 years into the past, that you were actually there, you experienced it.
Yeah.
Okay. How much different is it for you, somebody that like me, you that were there versus somebody that say that was born in the year 2000, 1999?
Yeah, it's very different.
No matter how much they want to relate to it, it's not the same as when you were there.
That's right.
No matter how much you could read, you could look at the movies or whatever, but if you weren't there at that moment, it's not the same as 30 or 40 or 70 years later.
Okay, case in point. Again, I like watching movies, so I'll watch movies in which they're trying to depict what the 80s looked like or the 70s.
Yeah.
And they're taking their idea of wine and glasses of wine and saying, oh, well, this was probably like what it was back then as well. There was none of that.
Yeah.
Or the idea of hugging people. There was none of that. It is now.
Right.
It wasn't then.
Exactly. And that's the thing that unless you were there at that moment living it, you get it. And I know what you mean, but sometimes I'll see movie and I'll go, what are they doing?
Okay. Another case in point. I like World War II movies because I'm a World War II buff. And so some of the movies that are coming out in World War II, if you go back and you watch the movies during the war and right after the war, in about like 7 or 8 years after the war, you're going to see a dialogue and a type of a person and what they were talking about. And they still have all the memory of what the war was like. And they have, so they were recreating scenes and sets based off of their experiences. Then you jump forward and you're going, oh, we're going to make a World War II movie in the year 2000 or 2010.
Right.
And all of those parts and pieces that were common to all of those people that knew that are not in this movie over here whatsoever.
Right. Exactly.
They don't talk that way. They don't act that way. They don't have the equipment. Oh yeah, you have a Sherman tank or you have, a half track, but there's all this other stuff that you don't have. And that's what I'm talking about. So if you pay attention on a cultural level, you can see all those little details.
The difference between somebody that was there versus somebody, even 70 years might not seem historically like a long time.
Right.
But for perspective wise, if it's something you're writing about, it can make a tremendous difference.
It's huge.
All right,
So,
David, thank you so much.
hey, well, thank you for
Are you
inviting
working
me.
on anything now? Do you have any projects in the works or anything like that?
Well, I don't have any writing projects, but I've been doing a lot of work with my art, and so that's one thing that's keeping me busy. And then
Okay.
I I've got some I I've been doing a lot of design work, geometric designs, and I'm going to take one of those designs, and when it's not so hot, like 109 and 110 degrees outside, I'm going to go take that design and put it out in my yard
Really?
with rocks. So that's going to be
Oh, cool.
one of the bigger, projects on the house that I'm going to be doing.
Yeah, I can see what you're going to wait for cooler weather. For my podcast listeners, David, do you want to give out a website address in case anybody wants to
Yeah,
follow up with you?
okay. So I wrote this book called Interviewing Jesus the Man, and I
Yes.
ended up getting my rights back from my publisher. And
Okay.
so I don't have an outlet for that. So, one day I will get it back out into the world. But in the
Okay.
meantime, I do have a website. It's called, you can reach me at www.davidcollis.com. And I'm also on Facebook, David C. Collis. So if you want
Okay.
to, reach out to me and, give me a text or give me an email through my website.
Okay, absolutely. Again, thank you so much. It's been absolutely wonderful. And I want to wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye. Yeah. Let me tell you something. That's love of material. Let me tell you, when you talk, the reason why I say this, I have two sons. I have one it's almost like I'm listening to it. It's like, man, you're my combo kids. I have one kid who is he builds. You give him anything. He'll build you a barbecue. He'll build you a shed. He'll build you a small house. The way his brain works, he sees something and he gets it. Like he doesn't even need instructions. He just puts stuff together, and he's just great. He's that's the way his brain works. And his stuff is, I want to be outdoors. If you tell him, hey, we're gonna give you a job behind the desk, he'd be like, what? That would be the worst for him. He's does construction as far as design. He's carpenter. Does a lot of carpentry work. And then I've got the other son, who real smart kid, real smart. Computers, writing, stuff like that. Totally different. Philosopher. That was one of his majors. He got a double major, one in history and one in philosophy. You told him, hey, I want you to build me something, be like, good luck on that. But anyway, getting back to the philosophy things, when I remember when he was going to school, we would talk a lot. We would talk about the different schools of philosophy that he was studying. And some of these things, it's like, and you gotta really like this philosophy stuff to get into it. That's why I'm saying what he was talking about as far as wanting to know something and going in depth in studying it. Whether it's the Greek philosophers or all the different schools of philosophy that were out there around that time. Stoicism, all these different things. It's you got to really have a thirst for knowledge. How's that? All right, because it doesn't sound like he did research light. It looks like he did research intensive. And getting back to something that I was asking him, I think a lot of people think that when you try to put like a historically overlay over Jesus, you're robbing him of his divinity. I don't think so. And I know a lot of people in the church will say, well, like you're trying to, I don't know how to put this, overhumanize him. In other words, steal his divinity away from him. When you just try to make him strictly a historical figure, I don't feel like that. I don't see how's this, the humanity, if you want to call it that, or I'm trying to think of the ordinary, or being an ordinary human doesn't steal or doesn't take away from his message. And really, that's what it is. It's what is the message? This is what David and me were talking about, as far as, where in times where everything was war and conquest and subjugation. Here you got this guy walking around saying, love one another, turn the other cheek, something totally different. Like, talk about a square peg in a round hole, at least as far as the times are concerned, or the place. How's that? Because if you say, well, okay, well, Jesus, ended up being born in Tibet or someplace like that, he could have fit right on in, but no, he was born in these times where, because of the turmoil that was going on, this was something significant that colored everybody's life. And I think a lot of us, I'm going to talk here in the United States, don't understand what it would be like to live as a conquered people. In other words, that, they're letting you live your life and you can practice your religion and you can come in. But at the end of the day, you've got armies stationed out there and you're expected to pay taxes. And you can settle minor legalities amongst yourself. But if it becomes any bigger than that, you got to go to the Roman people, the head honcho guy, to settle it, which kind of means, okay, children, figure it out. But if it, if not, I'm going to, don't make me have to like intervene. A lot of us don't understand what life would be like to live like that, where the culture or the people would be so anxious to throw off the yoke of the Romans. And here comes Jesus running around, well, with spreading a philosophy of love thy neighbor. And they're like, what? Love thy what? We're trying to figure out a way to get these Romans out of here. And we're not going to do it by turning the other cheek. So, yeah. Again, I don't think that this putting Jesus into a historical perspective diminishes from him. On the contrary, as to why he would do that. And I'm gonna go out on a limb here, but I'm not a big believer in blood sacrifice. I'm not. I don't think that God, whether you want to think of it as a male or female or whatever, the divine requires anything along those lines from anybody, especially humans. That blood thing, that's like something there doesn't add up as far as I'm concerned. Nope. It's especially if you're making an offering to God, interpret it as you will for that word, to appease him, to gain his forgiveness, to gain his, God does not want sacrifice, much less a blood sacrifice from us. That's Marlene's version of it. That Jesus might have been a product of his time and his culture, his ethnicity, as far as Jewish, that they do have blood sacrifices. That's a whole totally different thing. But that, no, I don't see that being part of the whole relationship between ourselves as humans and the divine. I don't. Their blood sacrifice period doesn't enter into it at all. And it makes you wonder, like, who came up with that bright idea? Suffering, will bring, that thing. And I'm Catholic. I don't know about this. Suffering will bring you closer to God. No. I mean, people suffer. Don't get me wrong. People suffer, but I'm going to put it in context as far as the way I understand it. I'm a mother. And I want to say, as a love for a child, I want to say is one of the most powerful emotions I've felt as a human being. Unselfish. How's this? Like, I would never, ever want from one of my children, even as an adult, that they do give me anything or sacrifice, or on the contrary, if there was any way that I could spare them, even as adults, again, from being hurt or disappointed or hurt physically or emotionally, and I know this is, and I'm pretty hands off with my kids because at some point they're adults, but I'm saying that my kids don't have to come around or that I would, I'm going to teach you a lesson, that kind of deal, which is kind of like what they do with God sometimes. If you want to look at it from like a parent-child type of relationship where you better do this or not do that to keep in good favor. How's this? That example that he gave where a bunch of these Jewish people got wiped out by another Jewish rabbi because basically they were going along with the with what the Romans were demanding of them, which was basically you're going to participate and not only give us taxes, but basically if they want to look at it, you're, I want to say worshiping or participating. How's that? Do you really think God cares about that? Really? You don't think that God could say, I know maybe you willingly wouldn't do this, but you're subjugated people right now. And I understand the circumstances. I mean, if I was a parent, I'm using this as, I would understand that. I would understand that totally. So when they put this thing of like that God is going to come down and punish you because you were, going along with the Romans, come on. I'm sorry. I don't agree with that. I just don't agree with that. I don't think that God, the divine, whatever you want to call it, is on that plane. And somewhere we lost it in translation about what our relationship is as humans with the divine and what that dynamic is, that kind of deal. Anyway, guys, let me get off my soapbox. Don't forget to sign up for my newsletter. Wherever you see whether it's the video or the podcast version, like it, subscribe to my channel so you get notifications. Sign up for my newsletter at mppellicer.com or miamighostchronicles.com. Again, this is a place where you can find links to all the shows, podcasts, and if you, whatever your podcast platform is, that's the place where you're going to get all the information. So again, guys, thank you for being part of my audience. You are all wonderful, and I will be seeing you soon next week. Come back. I have some great guests. Take care.